Hell's Angel gave his credit card to his only daughter to test her. What she did left him shocked. Sophie lingered in the doorway of their modest kitchen, her heart thumping against her ribs as she watched her father. Alex sat hunched over the wooden table, his leather vest draped across the back of his chair. His calloused fingers traced the edges of a silver credit card that gleamed under the warm kitchen light. She took a deep breath, smoothing down her blouse. At 22, Sophie had been waiting for this moment, this sign of trust from her father. The morning sun filtered through the worn curtains, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor as she stepped forward. "Morning, Dad," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The coffee maker gurgled in the background, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. Alex looked up, his weathered face creasing into a slight smile. "Morning, kiddo." His eyes, sharp despite the early hour, studied her face. "You're up early." Sophie pulled out a chair, the legs scraping against the floor. "I wanted to catch you before you headed out." She settled into the seat, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her blouse. "I've been thinking about what we discussed last week." "About the credit card?" Alex's voice was gruff, but not unkind. He'd raised her alone since she was 5, and she'd learned to read the subtle shifts in his tone, the way his shoulders tensed when he was concerned. "Yes." Sophie leaned forward, her dark hair falling around her face. "Dad, I know it's a big responsibility, but I'm ready. I've got my budget all planned out, and I've been tracking my expenses for months now." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper, spreading it on the table between them. Alex picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the neat columns of numbers. Sophie had spent hours working on that budget, making sure every detail was perfect. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. "You've always been organized," he said finally, placing the paper back down. "But this isn't just about numbers, Sophie. It's about trust." "I know, Dad." Sophie's voice softened. "You've taught me the value of money, of earning what you have. I won't let you down." Alex ran a hand through his graying hair, his rings catching the morning light. "Being a Hell's Angel isn't just about the patches and bikes. It's about honor, responsibility, keeping your word." His eyes met hers. "I've watched you grow up, Sophie. Watched you work hard, stay focused on your goals." Sophie nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She understood what this moment meant. It wasn't just about a credit card. It was about her father seeing her as an adult, trusting her judgment. "Remember when you were 12? Alex asked, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You saved up for 3 months to buy that second-hand laptop for your schoolwork. Wouldn't let me help you with a single penny." "It meant more that way," Sophie said softly, "knowing I'd earned it myself." Alex nodded, pride flickering across his face. He picked up the credit card, turning it over in his hands. The kitchen fell quiet, except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of morning traffic. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Sophie," he said, "but having access to credit, it's different from saving up cash. It can be tempting to spend money you don't have." Sophie met his gaze steadily. "I understand, Dad. I won't abuse your trust." Alex studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand, the credit card glinting between his fingers. "Use this wisely," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "It's a test. Show me you're worthy of it." Sophie sat at her desk, the silver credit card propped against her laptop screen. Morning sunlight streamed through her bedroom window, casting a warm glow on her face as she stared at the piece of plastic that represented so much more than just spending power. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Show me you're worthy of it." She pulled her planner closer, flipping to tomorrow's date where she'd written in bold letters, "Interview, Carson and Associates PR firm, 2 p.m. Her current wardrobe, filled mostly with sensible business, casual pieces from discount stores, suddenly felt inadequate for such a prestigious opportunity. First impressions matter, Sophie murmured to herself, opening her laptop and navigating to several high-end retail websites. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she remembered the countless conversations with her father about responsible spending. She'd watched him manage the motorcycle shop's finances for years, learning the importance of every dollar. Sophie opened a new spreadsheet, creating a detailed budget for the month. Her eyes lingered on the numbers: rent, utilities, groceries, gas. After accounting for all necessities, she had a clear picture of what she could responsibly spend on interview attire. Smart shopping, not emotional shopping, she reminded herself, something her father had drilled into her since she was old enough to understand money. She began her research methodically, opening multiple tabs and comparing prices, styles, and reviews. The hours ticked by as Sophie immersed herself in her search. Her coffee grew cold beside her as she scrutinized different options, considering each potential purchase carefully. This wasn't just about buying clothes. It was about investing in her future, about showing her father she could make sound decisions. Professional, sophisticated, but not flashy, she muttered, scrolling through pages of dresses. Her eyes kept returning to one particular designer piece, a navy blue sheath dress with subtle architectural details. The price made her stomach clench, but the reviews praised its quality and timeless style. Sophie sat back in her chair, running her fingers through her dark hair. The dress would eat up a significant portion of her budget, but it was versatile enough to wear to future interviews and important meetings. She could practically hear her father's voice. Value isn't just about the price tag. It's about what you get out of it. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend. Found something yet? Sophie typed back. Think so, but it's expensive. The response came quickly. Girl, this is Carson and Associates. You need to look the part. Sophie smiled, but her friend's enthusiasm didn't completely ease her anxiety. She opened another tab and researched Carson and Associates again, scanning through photos of their office and employees. Everyone looked impeccably dressed in designer wear. The firm handled PR for some of the biggest names in the city. Taking a deep breath, Sophie returned to the dress. She'd done her homework, compared prices across different sites, read every review, checked the return policy, and most importantly, made sure it fit within the budget she'd created. This wasn't an impulse purchase. It was a calculated investment in her career. With determined fingers, Sophie added the navy blue dress to her cart. The designer label and price tag represented more than just clothing. They represented her step into the professional world she'd been working toward since college. As she clicked through to the checkout page, she sat up straighter, feeling the weight of her father's trust and her own aspirations. Sophie stood in front of her full-length mirror, smoothing down the navy blue designer dress that fit her like it was made just for her. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her bedroom, but she barely noticed the changing light as she focused on her reflection. Her heart fluttered with a mix of excitement and nerves as she cleared her throat. "Why do you want to work for Carson and Associates?" she asked her reflection, straightening her shoulders and lifting her chin slightly. "I believe in the power of effective communication to create positive change. Your firm's track record of handling complex PR challenges while maintaining ethical standards aligns perfectly with my values and career goals." She repeated the answer, tweaking her words until they felt natural rather than rehearsed. The dress moved with her as she gestured, its fabric whispering quietly. Sophie couldn't help but smile, remembering how carefully she'd researched before making this purchase. The price tag still made her wince, but seeing herself now, professional, polished, ready to take on the corporate world, confirmed she'd made the right choice. What's your greatest strength? She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, trying different poses. I excel at building genuine connections with people. In my internship at Wilson Media, I developed relationships with key stakeholders that led to... A car horn blared outside, breaking her concentration. Sophie glanced at her phone. 5:47 p.m. She still had so much to prepare. Walking to her desk, she carefully removed the dress and hung it on the back of her closet door. The sight of it there gave her another flutter of nervous excitement. Settling into her desk chair, Sophie pulled out her resume. She'd reviewed it dozens of times already, but tonight she wanted to go through it one more time with fresh eyes. Each bullet point represented a stepping stone that had led her to this moment: the internships, the volunteer work, the leadership positions in college organizations. Her fingers traced over the paper as she read each line carefully. The desk lamp cast a warm glow over her workspace as evening settled in. She'd arranged everything methodically: resume copies printed on premium paper, business cards in their holder, portfolio of writing samples carefully assembled in a leather folder. Sophie felt like she was standing on the edge of something big. Carson and Associates wasn't just another PR firm. It was the firm in the city. Landing a position there would be more than just a job. It would be the beginning of the career she'd always dreamed of. A chance to prove to her father that his faith in her wasn't misplaced. She reached for her red pen, making small adjustments to her resume's formatting. The familiar scent of printer ink and paper filled her nostrils as she worked, the scratch of her pen against paper, the only sound in the quiet room. Each small refinement felt important, necessary, like pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together. The moon rose outside her window as Sophie continued her preparations, unaware that tomorrow would bring something entirely unexpected. Sophie's heels clicked against the polished marble floor as she entered Carson and Associates' lobby. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off chrome and glass surfaces. A massive modern art sculpture dominated the center of the space, its twisted metal forms reaching toward the vaulted ceiling. Her hand brushed against the soft fabric of her designer dress as she approached the reception desk. Despite the outfit's perfect fit, she couldn't shake the feeling that everyone could tell it was new, that she was trying too hard to belong in this world of corporate success and power. "Good morning," the receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile. "How may I help you?" "Sophie Hell's Angel, here for an interview with Mr. Davidson at 10 a.m. Her voice came out steady and clear, masking the nervous energy coursing through her body. While waiting, Sophie observed the steady stream of well-dressed professionals moving through the lobby. Their confidence seemed effortless, natural. She straightened her spine, mimicking their assured posture. The dress might be new, but her determination was genuine. The interview itself flew by in a blur of questions and answers. Mr. Davidson, a silver-haired man with kind eyes, seemed genuinely interested in her responses. They discussed crisis management strategies, public relations ethics, and her vision for the future of corporate communications. "Your perspective on stakeholder engagement is refreshing," he remarked, making notes on his tablet. "And your academic record is impressive." Sophie felt herself relax as the conversation flowed naturally. This was what she was meant to do. Every internship, every late night studying, every careful career move had led to this moment. 2 hours later, Sophie emerged from the conference room feeling lighter than air. Her cheeks hurt from smiling. Mr. Davidson's final words echoed in her mind. "We'll be in touch very soon, Ms. Hell's Angel, very soon indeed." As she walked toward the elevator, her heart soaring with possibility, she passed a small group of employees huddled near the water cooler. Their voices were low, urgent. "Federal investigation," one woman whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "They're saying the SEC is involved," another added quietly. "Something about cooking the books for clients." Sophie's steps slowed involuntarily as she caught fragments of their conversation. "Illegal activities going back years," a man in an expensive suit muttered. "The partners are trying to keep it quiet, but—" The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. Sophie stepped inside, her earlier elation now tangled with uncertainty. As the doors closed, she caught one final whisper. "Nobody knows how deep this goes." The lobby seemed different now as she crossed it for the last time. The gleaming surfaces felt less impressive, more like a carefully maintained facade. The massive sculpture's reaching arms appeared almost desperate rather than ambitious. Sophie pushed through the revolving door into the bright morning sunshine. Her dream job interview had gone perfectly, everything she'd hoped for. But now, standing on the sidewalk outside Carson and Associates, those overheard whispers cast a shadow over her success. Sophie's heart was still racing from the fragments of conversation she'd overheard when her phone buzzed in her purse. An unknown number flashed across the screen. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Is this Sophie Hell's Angel?" a woman's voice asked, low and urgent. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Patricia Weber. I used to work in compliance at Carson and Associates." The woman's voice trembled slightly. "I saw you leaving the building just now. You had an interview, didn't you?" Sophie stopped walking, moving to the side of the busy sidewalk. A chill ran down her spine, despite the warm morning sun. "How did you—" "Listen carefully," Patricia cut in. "I left the company 3 months ago because of what I discovered. They're not what they seem. The prestigious clients, the perfect reputation. It's all built on lies." Sophie leaned against the cool stone wall of a nearby building, her legs suddenly unsteady. "What do you mean?" "Money laundering, fraud, cooking the books for clients. It goes back years." Patricia's words tumbled out in a rush. "I tried reporting it internally first, then to the SEC. The federal investigation is just the tip of the iceberg." Traffic noise faded into the background as Sophie processed this information. Her free hand clutched her purse strap tightly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I was like you once," Patricia replied softly. "Young, ambitious, eager to prove myself. I thought Carson and Associates was my dream job too. But the things they asked me to do—" She paused. "They'll test you first with small things, things that seem harmless. Then before you know it, you're in too deep to get out." Sophie's mind raced back to Mr. Davidson's warm smile, his encouraging words. Had it all been an act? "How can I verify what you're saying?" "Check public records for cases filed against their biggest clients. Look up Meridian Holdings and Blue Summit Industries. The patterns are there if you know where to look." Patricia's voice grew urgent again. "I have to go, but please, think carefully before accepting any offer they make." The line went dead. Sophie stood frozen on the sidewalk, her phone still pressed to her ear. Business people rushed past her, their faces buried in their phones or lost in conversation. None of them knew her world had just shifted on its axis. Back in her apartment, Sophie laid the designer dress on her bed. The fabric caught the afternoon light, shimmering with promise. The promise of success, of belonging, of proving herself. But now that promise felt hollow. She ran her fingers along the smooth material, remembering how confident she'd felt wearing it just hours ago. The price tag was still attached, a reminder of her father's credit card test. He'd trusted her to make wise choices, and she'd wanted so badly to show him she could succeed in the corporate world. Standing there, staring at the dress that represented everything she'd been working toward, Sophie felt the weight of her situation settling onto her shoulders. The dream job she'd pursued so single-mindedly now seemed like a poisoned chalice. The prestigious company that could launch her career might instead destroy it, and her integrity along with it. The dress lay there, beautiful and expensive, a symbol of her ambitions. But now it also represented something else. The first step down a path she wasn't sure she could follow. Sophie's keys jingled in her trembling hands as she unlocked her apartment door. The weight of Patricia's words pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Inside, the familiar comfort of home did little to ease her racing thoughts. "You're home early, kiddo." Her father's gruff voice came from the kitchen. Alex sat at the kitchen table, cleaning parts of his motorcycle. The familiar smell of metal and oil filled the air. His weathered hands paused their work as he looked up, his eyes narrowing with concern. "How'd the interview go?" Sophie managed a weak smile, setting her purse down on the counter. She cleared her throat. They seemed impressed. The silence that followed felt thick and uncomfortable. Sophie busied herself getting a glass of water, hoping the cool liquid would help settle her churning stomach. Her father's eyes followed her movements, seeing right through her forced composure. "Something's eating at you," Alex observed, wiping his hands on a rag. It wasn't a question. Sophie's grip tightened on the glass. She wanted to tell him everything. About Patricia's call, about the federal investigation, about the knot of anxiety growing in her chest. But the words wouldn't come. How could she explain that her perfect opportunity might be nothing but a glamorous facade? "I'm fine," she said, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. "Just tired. Big day, you know." Alex's expression softened, but his eyes held a knowing look. He'd always been able to read her like an open book. "You don't have to carry everything alone, Sophie." She nodded, fighting back the sudden sting of tears. "I know, Dad. I need some time to think." In her bedroom, Sophie closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. The designer dress hung on her closet door, catching the afternoon light. Just this morning, it had represented everything she wanted: success, acceptance, a chance to prove herself. Now, looking at it made her stomach turn. She walked over and ran her fingers along the smooth fabric, remembering how proud she'd felt wearing it. The first button slipped easily through its hole as she began to undo the dress. Each button felt like a step away from the future she'd imagined for herself. Money had always been tight growing up. Alex had done his best, but Sophie had dreamed of more, of corner offices and important meetings, of making something of herself. The salary Carson and Associates offered could change everything. But at what cost? Her father's credit card lay on her dresser, a reminder of his trust in her judgment. Trust. The word echoed in her mind as she continued unbuttoning the dress. What good was a prestigious job if it meant compromising her integrity? What value did a corner office hold if she couldn't look at herself in the mirror? The last button came undone, and Sophie carefully hung the dress back up. In its reflection in her mirror, she saw more than just expensive fabric and perfect stitching. She saw a choice between the person she wanted to be and the person this job might force her to become. Her father had always taught her that a person's word was their bond, that trust once broken was hard to repair. These weren't just old-fashioned biker values. They were the foundation of who she was, who she wanted to remain. The dress swayed slightly in the breeze from her window, its promise now seeming hollow against the weight of what truly mattered: her integrity, her father's trust, and the person she saw in the mirror each morning. The boutique's glass doors gleamed in the afternoon sun as Sophie approached, clutching the shopping bag with the designer dress inside. Her heart thumped against her ribs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The same elegant mannequins that had drawn her in days ago now seemed to watch her with judgment. A small bell chimed as she pushed the door open. The familiar scent of new fabric and expensive perfume washed over her. Behind the counter, a different sales associate than before stood arranging a display of silk scarves. She looked up at Sophie's entrance, offering a practiced smile. "Welcome to Elegance Boutique. How may I help you today?" Sophie's throat felt dry. I need to return this dress." She placed the bag on the pristine glass counter, her fingers trembling slightly as she retrieved the receipt from her wallet. The associate, her name tag read Miranda, raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow. "Is there something wrong with the dress?" "No," Sophie said quickly, smoothing out the receipt. "It's beautiful, actually. It's just—" She paused, searching for the right words. "It's not right for me." Miranda unzipped the garment bag with practiced efficiency, examining the dress. Sophie watched anxiously as she checked the tags and inspected the fabric for any signs of wear. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Everything appears to be in order," Miranda finally said, reaching for the return form. "Though I must say this dress looked stunning on you the other day. I remember when you tried it on." Heat crept up Sophie's neck. "You were here?" "I was helping another customer." Miranda nodded, typing information into the computer. "You seemed so certain about it." Sophie's fingers found the edge of the counter, gripping it lightly. "Sometimes the things that seem perfect at first glance aren't what they appear to be." Miranda looked up from her typing, something shifting in her expression. The professional veneer softened slightly. "That's quite wise, actually." She finished processing the return, the printer humming to life. "Will the refund be going back to the same card?" "Yes, please." Sophie handed over her father's credit card, thinking about how much trust he'd placed in her. The card reader beeped, processing the transaction. "Just sign here," Miranda said, sliding the receipt across the counter. Sophie picked up the pen, its weight feeling significant in her hand. Each letter of her signature felt like a step toward something bigger than just returning a dress. The printer whirred again, producing the refund receipt. Miranda folded it carefully and handed it to Sophie. "All set. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Sophie shook her head, tucking the receipt into her wallet. "No, thank you. You've been very kind." As she turned to leave, Miranda called out softly, "Sometimes the hardest decisions end up being the right ones." Sophie paused, offering a small smile over her shoulder. Then she pushed through the glass doors, stepping back into the afternoon sunlight. The weight that had been pressing on her chest since the interview began to lift. The refund receipt in her wallet represented more than just returned money. It was a choice, a statement about who she was and what she valued. A gentle breeze ruffled her hair as she stood on the sidewalk, feeling lighter than she had in days. The path ahead might not be as clear or prestigious as she'd hoped, but at least it was honest. And somehow, that felt like enough. Sophie parked her car in front of the Hope Haven Women's Shelter, a modest brick building with weather-worn steps and potted flowers dotting the entrance. Through the weathered windows, warm light spilled onto the sidewalk as evening approached. She'd driven past this place countless times over the years, quietly dropping off donations when she could. The familiar creak of the front door welcomed her as she stepped inside. The reception area was simple but cozy. Mismatched furniture arranged in comfortable groupings, walls decorated with colorful artwork made by shelter residents. A bulletin board overflowed with community resources and success stories. "Sophie?" Martha, the shelter's coordinator, looked up from her desk with genuine warmth. Her silver hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. "What brings you by today?" Sophie's hand went to her purse, where the refund receipt sat next to the cash she'd withdrawn. "Just dropping something off." She approached the desk, noting the stack of bills Martha was sorting through. Utility payments, supply orders, all the endless expenses of keeping the shelter running. "We're always grateful for anything," Martha said, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "The winter months are coming up, and we're seeing more women needing help." Sophie glanced around the room, taking in the worn carpet, the dated furniture. She thought about the women who came here seeking refuge, carrying little more than hope and determination. The designer dress suddenly seemed even more frivolous in comparison. "I'd like this to be anonymous," Sophie said quietly, pulling out the envelope she'd prepared. She'd carefully counted out the exact amount from the dress refund, plus a little extra from her savings. It felt right, transforming what could have been a symbol of corporate success into something truly meaningful. Martha accepted the envelope with practiced discretion, not opening it in front of Sophie. "Of course, dear. Anonymous donations are perfectly fine." She tucked it carefully into the desk drawer. "You know, sometimes the biggest impacts come from the quietest actions." Sophie smiled, thinking about her father's test with the credit card. He might never know about this choice, but somehow that made it feel more genuine. "How's that art therapy program going?" she asked, nodding toward a new collection of paintings on the wall. "Making a real difference," Martha beamed. "We had 2 ladies last week tell us it was the first time they'd felt peaceful in months. One of them is starting art classes at the community college next semester." A woman emerged from the hallway carrying a sleeping toddler, her face tired but determined. Martha gave her a gentle wave as she settled into one of the armchairs, carefully adjusting her child without waking him. The sight stirred something in Sophie's chest, a reminder of why places like this mattered so much. "Well, I should get going," Sophie said softly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful scene. "Take care, Martha." "You too, dear, and thank you for everything." Sophie stepped back out into the evening air, the shelter's warm lights glowing behind her. The weight of the past few days, the interview, the moral dilemma, the dress, seemed to lift from her shoulders. She might not have landed the prestigious job or impressed anyone with an expensive outfit, but she'd done something real, something that mattered. As she walked to her car, a sense of quiet contentment settled over her. Her father might never know about this particular choice, but she knew she'd passed a different kind of test today, one she'd set for herself. Sophie's phone buzzed on her desk, the screen lighting up with an incoming email. Her stomach tightened as she saw the sender. HR Department, Maxwell and Brooks Financial. The job offer she'd been simultaneously hoping for and dreading had arrived. She stared at her phone for several long moments, her fingers hovering over the screen. The room suddenly felt too warm, too small. Through her bedroom window, she could see the neighborhood kids playing basketball, their carefree laughter a stark contrast to the weight pressing down on her chest. "Just open it," she whispered to herself, finally tapping the email. The offer letter was everything she'd dreamed of. The salary made her eyes widen, the benefits package was incredible, and the position came with significant responsibility. Associate Financial Analyst. The word seemed to mock her now, knowing what she did about the company's suspected activities. Sophie pushed back from her desk and paced her room, running her fingers through her hair. The conversation she'd overheard played on repeat in her mind. The feds are closing in. Money laundering, fraud. She'd done her research since then, finding whispers of investigations but nothing concrete. No charges filed, no official accusations. Her reflection caught her eye in the mirror. She looked tired, worried. This wasn't how she'd imagined feeling when receiving her dream job offer. She'd pictured excitement, celebration, maybe even tears of joy. Instead, her chest felt heavy with uncertainty. "I could make a difference," she said to her reflection, testing out the words. "From the inside, I could help." The idea took root, growing stronger as she considered it. If the rumors were true, wouldn't it be better to have someone honest on the inside? Sophie sat back down at her desk, opening her laptop to do more research. Maxwell and Brooks was one of the largest financial firms in the city. They handled millions in transactions daily, employed hundreds of people, and contributed significantly to local charities. On paper, they were exemplary corporate citizens. But those whispers, her father's words from their last conversation echoed in her mind. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that matter most. He'd been talking about motorcycle maintenance at the time, but the wisdom felt applicable now. Sophie opened the offer letter again, reading it more carefully this time. Her position would give her access to transaction records, client accounts, internal communications. If something illegal was happening, she'd be in a position to know about it. The cursor blinked at her as she opened a reply email. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, "Thank you for the offer." She paused, taking a deep breath. The right choice wasn't always the easy one. She'd learned that from her father, from years of watching him lead his club with integrity despite the pressures to do otherwise. "I am pleased to accept the position," she continued typing, each word feeling heavier than the last. For now, she would keep her suspicions to herself. She would watch, learn, and document anything suspicious. If there was wrongdoing, she would find it. Sophie hit send before she could second-guess herself. The email whooshed away, and with it, any chance of turning back. She was committed now, for better or worse. Her cursor hovered over the folder where she'd saved her research about the company's suspected activities. After a moment's hesitation, she moved it to a secure cloud drive instead of deleting it. Something told her she might need it later. Chapter 10. Dangerous Waters. Sophie's heels clicked against the polished marble floors of Maxwell and Brooks Financial as she followed her supervisor, Mark Chen, to yet another meeting. Her first week had been a whirlwind of introductions, training sessions, and increasingly uncomfortable conversations that made her stomach churn. "Remember," Mark said, pausing outside the mahogany conference room doors, "in these executive meetings, just take notes and observe. Don't speak unless directly addressed." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Sophie nodded, clutching her tablet closer to her chest. Inside, the conference room buzzed with the quiet conversations of a dozen executives in expensive suits. She slipped into a chair near the back, trying to make herself invisible while still maintaining a professional demeanor. CEO Richard Maxwell stood at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled. "Let's discuss the Cayman transfers," he announced, dimming the lights for the presentation. Sophie's fingers hovered over her tablet as numbers flashed across the screen. The figures didn't add up. She could see that plainly, even as a junior analyst. Companies with no employees showing millions in revenue, transfers split into suspicious amounts just under reporting thresholds, and shell corporations that seemed to exist only on paper. "The regulators are satisfied with our explanations," Charles Brooks, the other founding partner, declared with a satisfied smirk. "Our friends in the compliance department have been particularly understanding." Several executives chuckled. Sophie kept her face carefully neutral, though her heart raced. She'd suspected illegal activities, but seeing it happen in front of her was different. These weren't just rumors anymore. She was witnessing it firsthand. Throughout the week, similar meetings followed. Sophie documented everything discreetly, storing encrypted notes in her personal cloud drive. She noticed patterns emerging. Certain clients always got preferential treatment, specific accounts were handled with unusual privacy, and some transactions were discussed only in careful euphemisms. On Thursday afternoon, she sat in on a call with overseas investors where no one seemed to care that the client's identity was hidden behind layers of corporate entities. When she later checked the compliance requirements, the violation was clear. Getting comfortable with how we do things? Janet Porter, the head of client relations, asked her after the call. The woman's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her desk meaningfully. "Yes, I'm learning a lot," Sophie replied carefully, keeping her voice steady despite her unease. That evening, as Sophie was gathering her things to leave, her desk phone rang. The extension showed it was coming from the executive floor. Sophie Hell's angel? The smooth voice belonged to Charles Brooks himself. "I've been watching your work this week. Very impressive how quickly you're adapting to our culture." "Thank you, sir," Sophie responded, her mouth dry. "We take care of our own here at Maxwell and Brooks," he continued. "Those who understand how we operate, who show loyalty to the firm, well, they tend to advance quickly. Very quickly." He paused meaningfully. "The year-end bonus pool is quite substantial, and we're always looking for young talent who can be trusted with more sensitive responsibilities." Sophie's hand tightened around the phone. The implied message was clear. Stay quiet, play along, and be rewarded. Speak up and... "I understand, Mr. Brooks," she managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Excellent. We'll talk more soon." The line went dead, leaving Sophie alone with the weight of his words and the choice they demanded of her. The weight of silence. Sophie pushed her dinner around her plate, barely tasting the spaghetti she usually loved. The kitchen's familiar warmth felt stifling tonight, and even the comfort of being home couldn't ease the knots in her stomach. Across the table, her father Alex watched her with concerned eyes, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "You've barely touched your food," Alex said, his gruff voice gentler than usual. "That fancy new job giving you trouble?" Sophie forced herself to take a bite, avoiding his gaze. "No, it's fine. Just tired from learning everything." "Tired doesn't usually make you look like you've seen a ghost." Alex set his mug down with a soft thud. "I've watched you tackle every challenge head-on since you were knee-high. But something's different this time." The fork trembled slightly in Sophie's hand as she remembered Charles Brooks's words from earlier. The promise of rewards and the implicit threat still echoed in her mind. "Really, Dad, everything's okay. It's just intense. Big company, lots to learn." Alex leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Maxwell and Brooks, right? Been reading about them in the papers. Quite a reputation they've got." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Just that they're known for being aggressive in their business practices." He studied her face carefully. "You sure everything's on the up and up over there?" The concern in his voice made Sophie's chest tighten. She wanted to tell him everything about the suspicious meetings, the shady transactions, the veiled threats. But the words stuck in her throat. How could she admit she'd walked right into this situation, that she might be in over her head? "Dad, please." Sophie pushed her plate away, her appetite completely gone. "I know what I'm doing. The company's just different from what I expected. I need time to adjust." "Different how?" Alex pressed, his eyes narrowing. "Sophie, if something's wrong..." "Nothing's wrong!" The words came out sharper than she intended. Sophie took a deep breath, softening her tone. "I'm handling it. I just need you to trust me." Alex fell silent, but his expression said everything. He'd raised her to be strong, independent, and above all, honest. Now here she was, lying to his face. The disappointment in his eyes was almost unbearable. "I'm going to head up to my room," Sophie said quietly, standing from the table. "Got some work to review before tomorrow." Sophie. Alex's voice stopped her at the kitchen doorway. You know you can tell me anything, right? Whatever it is, we can figure it out together. Tears pricked at Sophie's eyes, but she didn't turn around. I know, Dad. I can't, not right now. Without waiting for his response, Sophie fled upstairs to her room, closing the door behind her. She leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the floor as the tears finally fell. The weight of her silence pressed down on her like a physical thing. Through the door, she could hear Alex moving around in the kitchen, cleaning up their barely touched dinner. The familiar sounds of home, dishes clinking, water running, cupboards closing, only made her feel more alone. She wanted nothing more than to run back downstairs and tell him everything, but fear held her in place. How could she explain that she might be complicit in something illegal? That she was too scared to walk away? That maybe she wasn't the daughter he'd raised her to be after all? So Sophie stayed silent, huddled in her darkening room, trapped between the truth she couldn't tell and the lies she couldn't keep telling. Scene 1. A choice to make. Sophie's heels clicked against the polished marble floor as she made her way to Charles Brooks's corner office. Her stomach churned with each step, the morning's coffee threatening to make a reappearance. The early morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the empty hallway. Come in, Sophie, Charles called out before she could even knock. He stood by his window, his tall frame silhouetted against the cityscape behind him. Please, have a seat. Sophie smoothed her skirt and sat in one of the plush leather chairs facing his massive desk. Everything in this office screamed power and money, from the expensive artwork on the walls to the rare wooden sculptures displayed on floating shelves. I've been watching your work closely, Charles said, turning to face her. His perfectly pressed suit probably cost more than her monthly salary. You've shown remarkable discretion these past weeks. Thank you, sir. Sophie's voice came out steadier than she felt. Charles settled into his chair, leaning forward with his fingers steepled. We have a situation that requires someone with your particular talents. He pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the desk between them. The Thompson merger. I'm sure you've heard whispers about it. Sophie nodded slowly. The Thompson merger had been the subject of hushed conversations in break rooms and worried glances between senior staff members. The numbers aren't quite aligning as we'd hoped. Charles's smile didn't reach his eyes. We need someone to help us smooth things over, make everything look more presentable. He opened the folder, revealing columns of numbers that made Sophie's heart race. Even at a glance, she could see the discrepancies, millions of dollars that didn't add up. Your role would be simple, Charles continued, his voice smooth as silk. Just help us reorganize these figures, create a narrative that's more palatable to our shareholders. He pulled out another document, a contract. Of course, this kind of responsibility comes with appropriate compensation. Sophie's eyes widened at the number on the paper. It was more money than she'd ever seen, enough to pay off her student loans and put a down payment on a house. That's just the beginning, Charles added, noting her reaction. There's a VP position opening up next quarter. Help us with this, and it could have your name on it. The air in the office felt thick, making it hard to breathe. Sophie stared at the contract, her father's face flashing in her mind. What would he think if he knew about this? This needs to be handled quickly, Charles said, his tone hardening slightly. The board meeting is next week. Are you interested in being part of the solution, Sophie? The implications hung heavy in the air. Being part of the solution meant not being part of the problem, and Sophie could guess what happened to those who became problems. Take the contract, Charles said, sliding it toward her. Review it, but I need your answer by tomorrow morning. Sophie stood on shaky legs, clutching the contract to her chest. She turned toward the door, her mind spinning with the magnitude of what she'd just been offered, and what it would cost her. There at the threshold, she froze, the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. This wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about who she was, who she wanted to be, and whether she could live with herself afterward. Her hand rested on the door handle, cold metal against her palm, as the full impact of the choice ahead of her sank in. Everything she'd worked for, everything she believed in, hung in the balance of what she would decide. A heavy heart. Sophie sat alone in her small office, staring at the contract that now felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The evening sun cast long shadows across her desk, and the usual bustle of the workplace had quieted to a distant hum. She picked up the thick document, her fingers trembling slightly as they traced over the embossed company logo. All those zeros on the salary line seemed to mock her now. Just hours ago, they had made her breath catch with excitement. Now they made her feel sick to her stomach. She pushed back from her desk and walked to her office window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. 20 stories below, people scurried about like ants, going about their honest day's work. Her reflection stared back at her, a young woman in a crisp business suit who suddenly looked lost and uncertain. What would Dad say? She whispered to herself. The answer came immediately. Alex hadn't raised her to take shortcuts or look the other way when things weren't right. He might be rough around the edges, but his moral compass had always pointed true north. Sophie returned to her desk and opened her bottom drawer, pulling out the small frame she kept there. It was a photo of her and Alex from her college graduation, him looking awkward in a suit, her beaming in her cap and gown. They both looked so proud that day. Pure pride, earned through hard work and determination, not through cooking books and covering up fraud. The memory of that day brought tears to her eyes. She'd promised herself she would make something of her life. But not like this. Never like this. Her computer screen flickered with a new email notification. Another urgent message from the finance department about the Thompson merger. Sophie ignored it, instead pulling out a fresh sheet of paper from her printer. With steady hands, she began to write her resignation letter. The words flowed easily now that she'd made up her mind. No amount of money was worth compromising who she was. No corner office or fancy title could replace her self-respect. She thought about the women's shelter where she'd made that donation. That small act had given her more satisfaction than all the weeks she'd spent in this gleaming tower of secrets and lies. Maybe that was a sign. Perhaps her path lay in helping others rather than helping herself. Sophie finished the letter and signed it with a flourish. A strange sense of peace settled over her as she slipped it into an envelope. The weight that had been crushing her chest since that morning lifted, replaced by something lighter. Hope, maybe, or relief. She gathered her personal items into her purse. The graduation photo, a small plant her father had given her favorite coffee mug. Everything else could stay. She wouldn't need it where she was going. Standing up, Sophie smoothed her skirt and straightened her shoulders. The corner office, with its promise of wealth and power, suddenly seemed less impressive, less important. She had something better. Her integrity. With the resignation letter in one hand and her purse in the other, Sophie walked to her office door. Her heels clicked against the floor with purpose now, each step taking her closer to being the person she wanted to be, the person her father had raised her to be. The unexpected visit. Sophie was halfway to the elevator when the commotion started. Loud voices echoed down the marble hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots stomping across the polished floor. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew those footsteps. "I'm here to see my daughter," a gruff voice demanded. "Sophie Hell's Angel." Sophie rushed back toward the main office area, her resignation letter still clutched in her hand. There, in the middle of the pristine corporate lobby, stood Alex. His leather vest was adorned with patches, his gray hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, looking completely out of place among the suits and ties. The receptionist, Linda, seemed frozen in place, her perfectly manicured hand hovering over the security button. 2 security guards had already appeared, but they kept their distance, clearly uncertain how to handle this situation. "Sir, you need to schedule an appointment," one of the guards said, trying to sound authoritative. Alex's weathered face hardened. "I don't need an appointment to see my kid. Something's wrong, and I'm here to find out what." "Dad?" Sophie called out, her voice echoing in the now silent lobby. Everyone turned to look at her. Before she could reach him, Mr. Thompson, the CEO himself, emerged from his corner office, his face flushed with irritation. "What is the meaning of this disruption?" Alex turned to face him, drawing himself up to his full height. "You must be the boss man," he said, his voice low and steady. "I've been watching my daughter come home looking more stressed and troubled every day since she started working here. Now, I may not wear fancy suits or work in a glass tower, but I know when something's not right." Sophie felt her chest tighten with emotion. She hadn't told her father anything, yet somehow he'd known. He'd sensed her distress, her moral struggle, and had come to stand by her side. "This is highly inappropriate, Mr. Thompson spluttered, looking around at the gathering crowd of employees. "Security, please escort this man out." "I'm not going anywhere," Alex stated firmly, planting his feet. "Not until I know my daughter is being treated right. Sophie's got more integrity in her little finger than most people have in their whole body. If you're putting her in positions that compromise that, we're going to have a problem." Sophie moved to stand beside her father, touched by his fierce protection. She'd always known he cared, but seeing him here, standing up to corporate executives without a hint of intimidation, made her realize just how deep that care ran. "Dad," she said softly, touching his arm, "I was just leaving anyway." She held up her resignation letter. "I can't work here anymore. The things they're doing, they're not right." Alex's expression softened as he looked at his daughter, pride evident in his eyes. "That's my girl," he said quietly. Then, turning back to Mr. Thompson, his voice grew stern again. "You hear that? My daughter's too good for whatever you've got going on here. And if I hear about any trouble coming her way because of this, you'll be dealing with me personally." Mr. Thompson's face had gone from red to pale, his eyes darting between Alex's intimidating presence and the growing crowd of onlooking employees. Sophie watched as her father, this man who had raised her with such strong principles, stood there defending not just her safety, but her integrity. The fallout. Sophie watched helplessly as security escorted her father out of the building. Mr. Thompson's face had transformed from fear to cold calculation, his Titigar nervousness replaced by a predatory smile that made her skin crawl. "Miss Hell's Angel," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I'm afraid after this display, we'll need to have a serious discussion about your future here." The next hour passed in a blur of accusations and thinly veiled threats. In the conference room, surrounded by stern-faced executives, Sophie sat alone as they systematically dismantled her professional reputation. "We've discovered some concerning discrepancies in your expense reports," Mrs. Davis, the HR director, announced, sliding a folder across the polished table. Sophie's hands trembled as she opened it. The documents inside were clearly fabricated, but done skillfully enough to look legitimate. "That's not true," Sophie protested, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those aren't my reports." We also have reason to believe you've been sharing confidential company information, Mr. Thompson added, his words sharp and calculated. Several of our clients have reported suspicious contacts. Sophie's stomach churned as she realized what they were doing. They were building a case against her, creating a paper trail that would make her unhireable. Her reputation, the one thing she'd worked so hard to build, was being shredded before her eyes. As she cleared out her desk, whispers followed her through the office. Former colleagues averted their eyes, some even physically turning away as she passed. Jenny from accounting, who she'd had lunch with just yesterday, hurriedly shut her office door when Sophie approached to say goodbye. I heard she was stealing company information, someone whispered. Apparently she was cooking the books, another voice added. No surprise, considering her background, a third person muttered, just loud enough for Sophie to hear. Each comment felt like a physical blow. The cardboard box in her arms grew heavier with each step toward the elevator. Inside were her personal items, a small plant, some family photos, a coffee mug her father had given her for Christmas. Such simple things that now felt like remnants of a life she'd lost. In the parking garage, Sophie's composure finally crumbled. She fumbled with her car keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. Once inside, she sat motionless, staring at nothing through the windshield. The tears came suddenly and violently. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, as sobs racked her body. Everything she'd worked for, all her dreams of making something of herself, of proving she could succeed in the corporate world, it had all come crashing down in a single morning. Her phone buzzed with notifications, LinkedIn connections being severed, work contacts blocking her, industry groups removing her membership. The company's smear campaign was working with frightening efficiency. They were making sure she wouldn't just lose this job, but any chance at another one in the field. Sophie looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror, barely recognizing the devastated woman staring back at her. Her carefully applied makeup was streaked with tears, her professional facade completely shattered. In just a few hours, she'd gone from rising corporate star to industry pariah. The weight of it all, the accusations, the lies, the betrayal, pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. She'd lost everything she'd worked for, and she had no idea how to begin picking up the pieces. Sophie parked her car outside the women's shelter, her hand still shaking on the steering wheel. The modest brick building looked exactly as it had when she'd made her donation just days ago, but everything else in her world had changed dramatically. She sat there for a moment, gathering her courage, before stepping out into the crisp morning air. The familiar buzz of the entry system greeted her, and Maria's warm voice came through the speaker. Sophie? Is that you, honey? Yes, Sophie managed, her voice cracking. Can I come in? The door clicked open, and Sophie stepped into the familiar environment that had always brought her comfort. The walls, painted in soft yellows and greens, seemed to embrace her. The sound of children playing echoed from the daycare room down the hall. Maria, the shelter's director for the past 15 years, took one look at Sophie's tear-stained face and immediately wrapped her in a motherly hug. Oh, sweetie, come on back to my office. Sophie followed Maria through the corridor, passing Jenny, one of the regular volunteers, who gave her a concerned smile. In Maria's office, decorated with children's artwork and thank you cards, Sophie sank into the worn leather chair she'd sat in many times before, while helping with fundraising efforts. They destroyed everything, Sophie said, the words tumbling out between fresh tears. My reputation, my career, everything I worked for. She told Maria about the false accusations, the fabricated documents, the whispers in the hallways. Maria listened intently, her weathered face showing both concern and understanding. When Sophie finished, Maria reached across her desk and took Sophie's hand. You know what I see when I look at you? Maria asked, her voice gentle but firm. I see the same young woman who started volunteering here 6 years ago, the one who spent countless weekends helping our residents prepare for job interviews, the one who organized that incredible Christmas drive last year. Sophie wiped her eyes with a tissue. But how can I help anyone now? They've made sure no company will touch me. There's always a way forward, Jenny said from the doorway. She stepped into the office, carrying 3 cups of tea. Remember Mrs. Rodriguez? When she came here, she'd lost everything. Her home, her job, her dignity. Now she owns that successful catering business. Maria nodded. Sometimes losing everything is just life's way of clearing the path for something better, something more authentic. Sophie wrapped her hands around the warm teacup, letting its heat seep into her cold fingers. The familiar scent of chamomile filled her nostrils, grounding her. You have something they can never take away, Maria continued. Your integrity, your values. Those aren't just words on a resume. They're who you are. Sophie thought about her father's unexpected visit to her office, how he'd stood up for her without hesitation. She thought about the dress she'd returned, choosing to help others instead of pursuing status. Every time she'd chosen what was right over what was easy. The corporate world isn't the only place where you can make a difference, Jenny added softly. Sometimes the most meaningful work happens in places like this. Looking around the office, at the walls covered with success stories of women who'd rebuilt their lives from nothing, Sophie felt something shift inside her. The crushing weight of defeat began to lift, replaced by a familiar determination. You're right, Sophie said, straightening in her chair. They might have taken my job, but they haven't taken who I am. I won't let them win by giving up. Maria smiled, recognition flickering in her eyes. There's the Sophie we know. Sophie sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, and a fresh cup of coffee steaming beside her. Instead of scrolling through the usual corporate job boards, she was reading about organizations that focused on social impact. Her notebook was filled with names of non-profits, charitable foundations, and ethically minded companies. Making a list and checking it twice? Alex asked, walking into the kitchen. Sophie managed a small smile. Something like that. I'm trying to find places where I can actually make a difference, not just make money. She clicked through to the profile of Sarah Chen, a former corporate lawyer who now ran an organization helping women escape domestic violence. Sophie had met her at a fundraiser for the women's shelter last year. Without hesitation, she drafted an email explaining her situation and asking for guidance. Over the next few days, Sophie's inbox began filling with responses. Sarah invited her to coffee, eager to discuss opportunities in the non-profit sector. The director of a fair trade organization wanted to hear her story. A sustainable business consultant suggested meeting for lunch. I can't believe how many people want to help, Sophie told Maria during her next visit to the shelter. She was organizing donations, something that always helped clear her mind. People recognize genuine integrity when they see it, Maria replied, helping her sort through a box of children's clothes. And word gets around in these circles. Sophie met with Sarah at a small cafe downtown. The lawyer's elegant gray suit reminded Sophie of her old corporate life, but Sarah's warm smile and genuine interest in helping others set her apart. The corporate world's loss is our gain, Sarah said, stirring her tea. We need people like you, Sophie. People who understand business but haven't lost their moral compass. Sarah introduced Sophie to her network of social entrepreneurs and non-profit leaders. Each meeting led to another connection, another possibility. For the first time since leaving her corporate job, Sophie felt energized rather than drained. One morning, while volunteering at the shelter, Sophie received an email that made her heart skip. It was from Ethical Enterprises, a company known for its stringent moral standards and commitment to social responsibility. They wanted to interview her for a position as their community outreach director. The role would involve coordinating with nonprofits, managing charitable initiatives, and ensuring the company's practices aligned with its values. It was everything Sophie had dreamed of, but hadn't dared hope for. Her hands trembled as she read the job description. The salary was lower than her corporate position, but the work was meaningful. They specifically mentioned her experience with the women's shelter as a key factor in their interest. "Maria," Sophie called out, her voice thick with emotion. "Look at this." Maria read the email over Sophie's shoulder, her face breaking into a broad smile. "This is perfect for you, honey. They're getting someone who's already proven she'll stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." 2 interviews, and a week later, Sophie's phone rang. The CEO of Ethical Enterprises herself was calling to offer her the position. As she listened to the details, Sophie felt tears of relief and joy rolling down her cheeks. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to rebuild her career on a foundation of integrity. The late afternoon sun slanted through the garage windows, casting long shadows across Alex's motorcycle. His hands moved rhythmically over the chrome, working the polishing cloth in smooth circles. The familiar motion helped him think, something he'd been doing a lot lately about Sophie. The garage smelled of leather polish and motor oil, a scent that had always meant home to him. His weathered hands paused on the bike's fuel tank, catching his reflection in the gleaming surface. The man looking back at him seemed different somehow, softer around the edges, maybe. "Who'd have thought?" he muttered to himself, remembering how scared he'd been when he first took Sophie in. Back then, he couldn't imagine a Hell's Angel raising a little girl. Now here she was, all grown up and making choices that made his chest swell with pride. He picked up a fresh cloth and moved to the handlebars, remembering the day he'd given her his credit card. It had been a test, sure, but not the kind she probably thought. He hadn't cared about how she spent the money. He'd wanted to see what kind of person she'd become when faced with real choices. The chrome sparkled under his careful attention, but his mind was elsewhere. That fancy dress she'd bought and returned, the way she'd stood up to those corporate sharks, how she kept going back to help at that shelter, every choice showed her character. "Raised her right after all," he said to the empty garage, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Still, worry gnawed at him. The corporate world had tried to crush her once already. Who knew what other challenges lay ahead in this new job? Alex set down his polishing cloth and walked over to his workbench. Under a stack of old maintenance manuals lay an envelope. He pulled it out, looking at the thick wad of cash inside. He'd been saving it for a new paint job on his bike, but something told him there was a better use for it. The decision felt right as he stuffed the envelope into his jacket pocket. He swung his leg over his motorcycle, the familiar leather seat creaking beneath him. The engine roared to life, echoing off the garage walls. The women's shelter wasn't far, just a 15-minute ride through town. He'd never been there before, had only heard about it through Sophie's stories. As he pulled into the parking lot, he noticed how ordinary the building looked from the outside. Nothing fancy, just a place where people could find help when they needed it most. Inside, the shelter felt warmer than he'd expected. A woman at the front desk, Maria, according to her name tag, looked up with a welcoming smile that only faltered slightly at his rough appearance. "Can I help you?" she asked. Alex cleared his throat. "Yeah, I'm Sophie's dad. Wanted to make a donation." He pulled out the envelope and placed it on the desk. "She's taught me a thing or two about what matters." Maria's face softened. "Sophie's dad? She talks about you all the time." "Does she now?" Alex felt his cheeks warm slightly. He looked around the shelter's modest lobby, seeing it through new eyes. This was the kind of place Sophie had chosen to support. Not some fancy corporate office, but somewhere that actually helped people. As he stood there, Alex felt something shift inside him. His little girl wasn't so little anymore, and maybe it was time he stopped worrying so much about protecting her and started supporting the path she'd chosen for herself. Scene 1. Fresh start. Sophie stood in front of the Greenwood Community Development Center, taking in the modest 3-story building. No gleaming glass towers here, no marble lobby, just warm red brick and a banner that read, "Building Better Communities Together." Her new blazer felt comfortable, nothing like the stiff designer clothes she'd worn at her last job. Inside, her new office was small but bright, with a window overlooking a community garden. She arranged her few personal items, a small potted plant, a family photo, and her father's old leather keychain on the desk. The keychain was weathered and scratched, just like Alex, but it reminded her of home. "Morning, Sophie?" Linda, her new supervisor, poked her head in. She was a woman in her 50s with laugh lines around her eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Ready for your first community meeting?" Sophie nodded, but her stomach tightened. The last time she'd been in a meeting. She pushed the memory away. This was different. These people weren't like the executives at her old company. The conference room was filled with local business owners and community leaders. As Sophie presented her ideas for small business development programs, she felt her confidence growing. These people nodded, asked questions, engaged honestly. No hidden agendas, no subtle threats. But when someone mentioned corporate partnerships, Sophie felt her throat constrict. Her hands grew clammy as memories of her last job flooded back. The pressure, the betrayal, the smear campaign. She took a deep breath, reminding herself she was safe here. After the meeting, Linda caught up with her in the hallway. "You did great in there, Sophie, though I noticed you tensed up a bit when discussing partnerships." Sophie's shoulders slumped. "That obvious, huh?" Linda's eyes were kind. "We all carry scars from previous experiences. The key is not letting them define our future." Back in her office, Sophie looked out at the community garden. A group of kids was planting vegetables with their teachers. It was so different from her view of the city skyline at her old job. Here, she could see the direct impact of her work. She picked up her phone and dialed her father's number. Each ring made her smile wider. She had so much to tell him. "Hey, kid," Alex's gruff voice came through. "How's the new job?" "Dad, it's..." Sophie's voice caught. "It's exactly where I'm supposed to be. We had our first community meeting today. These people actually care about making things better, not just profits." "Proud of you, Sophie." His voice was soft, the way it got when he was really feeling something. "You stuck to your guns, did what was right." "I learned from the best," she said, twirling his keychain in her fingers. "By the way, Maria at the shelter told me about your visit." There was a pause, then a gruff chuckle. "Yeah, well, figured if my kid could see the value in helping others, maybe her old man could too." Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. "Thanks, Dad. Not just for the donation, but for everything. For showing me that standing up for what's right matters more than fitting in." "You're doing good, kid. Real good." The pride in his voice made her heart swell. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that only happens between people who understand each other completely. Sophie watched the kids in the garden below, planting seeds for tomorrow, just like she was doing in her own way. A new purpose. Sophie stood before a group of 20 women at the community center, her heart full of purpose. The Skills for Success workshop was her idea, a 6-week program teaching everything from resume writing to interview skills. Looking at the eager faces before her, she remembered how lost she'd felt just months ago. Success isn't just about wearing the right clothes or saying the right things, Sophie explained, pacing the room with comfortable confidence. It's about knowing your worth and standing firm in your values. Maria, a single mother of 3, raised her hand. But what if the interviewer makes you feel small, like you don't belong? Sophie's mind flashed to her own experience in that gleaming corporate tower. That's exactly what we're here to work on. Your confidence isn't something anyone can take from you. The women worked in pairs, practicing introduction speeches they'd developed. Sophie moved between groups, offering gentle guidance and encouragement. She noticed how Jen, a formerly homeless veteran, was helping another participant perfect her handshake. These women weren't just learning. They were lifting each other up. Remember, Sophie addressed the group, every one of you has something valuable to offer. We're going to help you show that to the world. After the workshop, Sophie reviewed the feedback forms, smiling at the positive comments. Her phone buzzed, a text from her father. At the shelter. Got an idea. Come by? 20 minutes later, Sophie pulled into the shelter's parking lot. Alex's motorcycle was already there, its chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun. She found him in the shelter's small office, deep in conversation with Patricia, the shelter's director. Sophie, Patricia beamed. Your father's been telling me about his idea. Alex turned, his weathered face bright with excitement. Kid, remember how the Angels used to do those charity rides? Sophie nodded, settling into a chair. She'd grown up watching the motorcycle club organize rides for various causes. Well, I've been thinking, Alex continued, what if we did something bigger? A women's empowerment ride, maybe partner with your skills program. We could use the publicity, Patricia added, and the funds would help expand the job training facilities. Sophie leaned forward, her mind already racing with possibilities. We could make it an annual event. Get local businesses involved, maybe even set up a mentorship program. Alex finished her thought. That's what I was thinking. Some of the women in the club have amazing business experience. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. This was her father, rough around the edges but with a heart of gold. He'd come so far from just testing her with a credit card. The rides always get good turnout, Alex continued. And with your networking skills, Sophie? We could make this huge, Sophie agreed. She turned to Patricia. What do you think? Patricia was already pulling out a calendar. Let's start planning. We'll need permits, sponsors. Sophie watched her father and Patricia dive into logistics, her heart swelling with pride and purpose. This was what success really looked like. Not a corner office or designer clothes, but making a real difference in people's lives. Sophie slid into the worn leather booth of Joe's Diner, the familiar scent of coffee and pancakes wrapping around her like a warm blanket. Alex sat across from her, his leather vest draped over the back of his seat. Early morning sunlight streamed through the window, casting a gentle glow on their usual breakfast spot. Remember when we used to come here every Sunday? Sophie asked, stirring cream into her coffee. The spoon clinked softly against the ceramic mug, a sound that brought back countless memories. Alex chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Yeah, you'd always beg for chocolate chip pancakes, then throw a fit when I made you eat some eggs first. I was quite the handful, wasn't I? Sophie smiled, watching the cream swirl in her coffee. Still are, kid. Alex's voice was gruff but warm. But you turned out better than I could have hoped for. The waitress arrived with their usual orders, a stack of pancakes for Sophie, eggs and hash browns for Alex. For a moment they both focused on their food, comfortable in the familiar routine. You know, Alex said, breaking the silence, watching you these past few months, it's made me think about a lot of things. The credit card test, for instance. I realize now it wasn't just about testing you. Sophie looked up, fork paused halfway to her mouth. What do you mean? I was testing myself too, learning to let go, to trust you to make your own choices. He pushed his hash browns around his plate. Wasn't easy for an old control freak like me. Dad. Sophie reached across the table, squeezing his weathered hand. You've changed too. I mean, look at you now. Planning charity events, working with the shelter. The old Alex would have laughed at the idea. Maybe you rubbed off on me, he admitted, a slight smile playing at his lips. Seeing you stand up for what's right, even when it cost you everything, that took guts. Kid, real guts. Sophie felt warmth spread through her chest. I was so scared you'd be disappointed in me when everything fell apart at the company. Disappointed? Alex shook his head. I've never been prouder. You chose integrity over success. That's something money can't buy. I learned that from you, you know, Sophie said softly. All those years of watching you stick to your principles, even when it wasn't easy. They ate in companionable silence for a few moments, the diner's morning bustle creating a comfortable background noise. I think I finally understand what you've been trying to teach me all these years, Alex said, pushing his empty plate aside. It's not about control or power. It's about trust and being there for others. Watching you work with those women at the shelter, that's real leadership. Sophie felt tears prick at her eyes. You know what's funny? After everything that happened, I finally feel at peace, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That's because you are, kid. You found your path, and you're walking it with your head held high. Alex reached for his wallet, but Sophie stopped him. Let me get this one, she said, pulling out her own wallet. Consider it payback for all those Sunday pancakes. Alex watched her with pride, seeing not just his daughter, but the strong, compassionate woman she'd become. Their relationship had evolved from simple father-daughter dynamics into something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. Sophie walked into the gleaming conference room, her heart beating steadily in her chest. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting warm light across the polished oak table. This wasn't like her old company. Here, the air felt lighter, charged with possibility rather than tension. Please, have a seat, Sophie. Sarah Chen, the CEO, gestured to a chair beside her. 3 other board members sat around the table, their expressions warm and welcoming. Sophie smoothed her simple navy blazer, so different from the designer clothes she used to wear, and took her seat. She'd spent the last 6 months proving herself at this ethical investment firm, putting in extra hours and bringing fresh ideas to the table. We've been watching your work closely, Sarah began, her dark eyes twinkling. Particularly your initiative with the community outreach program. The way you've connected our firm with local businesses and non-profits has been impressive. Thank you, Sophie replied, her hands clasped carefully in her lap. I believe in what we're doing here. Mark, the head of operations, nodded approvingly. That shows in everything you do, Sophie. Your passion for ethical business practices and community development hasn't gone unnoticed. Sarah pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. That's why we'd like to offer you the position of Director of Community Relations and Development. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as she opened the folder. The position was new, created specifically with her strengths in mind. The role would allow her to expand their community initiatives while maintaining the firm's commitment to ethical practices. This would mean leading a team of 12, Sarah continued. You'd have full authority to develop new programs and partnerships. The salary and benefits package are outlined in there. Sophie scanned the documents, her eyes widening at the figures. It was more than she'd made at her previous job, but this time, the money came with pride instead of compromise. I don't know what to say, Sophie managed, her voice thick with emotion. Say yes, Mark chuckled. We need someone with your integrity and vision in this role." Sophie looked around the table at these people who had become more than colleagues. They were mentors who valued what she brought to the table. "Yes," she said firmly. "Absolutely yes." After the meeting, Sophie practically floated back to her office. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her phone to call Alex. He answered on the second ring. "Dad? You'll never believe what just happened. Hit me with it, kid." Alex's gruff voice came through, warm and familiar. Sophie couldn't keep the excitement from her voice as she told him about the promotion. "They created the position specifically for me, Dad. They said it was because of my integrity and vision." "Of course they did," Alex replied, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "They know what I've known all along. You're something special, Sophie." "I couldn't have done any of this without you," Sophie said softly. "You taught me to stand by my principles, even when it was hard." "You did that all on your own," Alex countered. "But hey, this calls for a celebration. How about dinner tonight? That little Italian place you love?" "Sounds perfect," Sophie smiled, looking out her office window at the city below. 7 o'clock? "I'll be there," Alex promised. "And Sophie, I'm proud of you, kid. Really proud." Sophie felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Thanks, Dad. See you tonight." Sophie sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork and spreadsheets, while Alex leaned over her shoulder, his weathered hands resting on the back of her chair. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow on their shared work. "If we coordinate with 3 more shelters in the area," Sophie explained, pointing to a map marked with red pins, "we can expand the job training program to help twice as many women." Alex nodded, his eyes scanning the numbers. "And what about transportation? Some of these women don't have reliable ways to get to the training centers." Sophie smiled, touched by how thoroughly her father had embraced this project. "Already thought of that," she replied, pulling out another document. "I've been talking to local rideshare companies about partnering with us. They're willing to provide discounted rides for program participants." "Smart thinking, kid," Alex said, pride evident in his voice. He pulled up a chair next to her, his leather jacket creaking as he sat. "You know, I've been talking to some of my old riding buddies. They want to help too." Sophie raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Really? How?" "Well," Alex cleared his throat. "Turns out some of them own businesses now, auto shops, construction companies, that sort of thing. They're willing to offer apprenticeships, maybe even full-time positions to women who complete the training." Sophie's eyes lit up. "Dad, that's perfect. We could create a whole network of opportunities." She quickly made notes on her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys. "With your connections and my corporate partnerships, we could build something really sustainable." They spent the next few hours refining their plans, Alex's practical street wisdom complementing Sophie's business acumen. They worked out budgets, timelines, and partnership agreements, their different perspectives creating a stronger whole. Later that evening, they stood together at the annual Community Impact Awards ceremony. The grand ballroom was filled with local leaders and philanthropists, but Sophie couldn't take her eyes off her father. Alex had traded his usual leather jacket for a suit, though he'd insisted on keeping his boots. The announcer's voice echoed through the room. "For their outstanding contribution to women's empowerment and community development, we're proud to present this year's Excellence in Community Service Award to Sophie Hell's Angel and her father, Alex Hell's Angel." As they walked to the stage together, Sophie squeezed her father's arm. The audience applauded, but what touched her most was seeing the women from the shelter, some of whom were now successful graduates of their program, standing and cheering. Alex stepped up to the microphone first, surprising everyone. Once a man who preferred to let his actions speak for him, he now addressed the crowd with quiet confidence. "This program isn't just about giving people a handout," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. It's about giving them a chance to rebuild their lives with dignity. And I couldn't be prouder to work alongside my daughter to make that happen." Sophie watched her father speak, her heart swelling with emotion. This was the same man who had once tested her with a credit card, wanting to see if she could make the right choices. Now here he was, transformed by their shared mission, speaking from the heart about helping others. The spotlights gleamed off Alex's silver hair as he continued to address the crowd, his usual gruff exterior softened by genuine passion for their work. Sophie could see in his bearing, in his voice, in every gesture, that he had found a new purpose, one that went beyond their father-daughter bond to touch countless other lives. A quiet moment. The evening air was crisp and cool as Sophie and Alex sat on their front porch, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The wooden porch swing creaked gently as they rocked back and forth, sharing a comfortable silence that spoke volumes about how far they'd come. Sophie wrapped her hands around a steaming mug of tea, breathing in its warmth. "Remember when you first handed me that credit card?" she asked, glancing at her father with a small smile. "I was so nervous about proving myself to you." Alex chuckled, the sound deep and familiar. "You were always trying to prove yourself, even when you didn't need to." He adjusted his leather jacket against the cooling air. "But that test, that was different." "I thought it was about money management," Sophie admitted, watching as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees. "But it was never about that, was it?" "Nope." Alex leaned back, his weathered boots planted firmly on the porch boards. "It was about character, about making the right choices when nobody's watching." Sophie nodded, remembering the designer dress she'd returned, the donation to the women's shelter, and the difficult decision to leave her high-paying job. "Those choices weren't always easy." "The right ones rarely are," Alex replied, his voice gentle. "But you stuck to your guns, even when that company tried to buy your silence, even when they tried to ruin your reputation." The swing creaked again as Sophie shifted, remembering those dark days. "I was terrified I'd disappointed you, that I'd somehow failed your test by getting mixed up with them in the first place." "Failed?" Alex shook his head, a hint of surprise in his voice. "Kid, you showed more strength walking away from that job than most people show in their whole lives." The sunset had deepened now, casting long shadows across the porch. In the distance, crickets began their evening song, a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. "And now look at us," Sophie said, gesturing to the stack of papers they'd brought home from the awards ceremony. "Running programs, helping women rebuild their lives, making real change in the community." Alex's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "Who would have thought a crusty old biker and his daughter would end up here?" They shared a laugh, and Sophie felt the familiar warmth of gratitude spread through her chest. The journey hadn't been easy, but every step had led them to this moment, sitting together as partners in purpose, rather than just father and daughter. The last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving behind a dusky purple sky. Alex turned to Sophie, his expression serious but soft. "You've proven yourself, kid. You did the right thing, and I'll always have your back." Sophie smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of the life she's meant to live.